They found her under the viaduct like someone had misplaced a mistake. Rain was still making maps on the sidewalk, neon stuttering in puddles, and the city smelled the way it always smells when it wants to forget something: fried oil and exhaust and the ghost of perfume. Her name wasn't on the skid. Marked badge the cop shoved at me. Names are formalities. You learn more from feet and knuckles, and the way a mouth is set when it's stopped trying to tell you a lie. She had one shoe. Her right hand was clenched around a tiny brass token, stamped with the number 14, and a crude logo I'd seen once in the back room of a bar that didn't ask questions. Pinned to her palm with a safety pin, a torn photograph of a skyline, the lights smeared like someone had been crying or trying to erase it. Hale, Lila said, when she slid back against the squad car and offered me a cigarette like we were children hiding from thunder. They'll call it an OD if they have to, if they want it to be less paperwork. I looked at the token, at the way the thread through her sleeve had been cut clean, precise. Someone had left a signature without a name. That's how all bad things start in Harrow, with a small, neat thing that wants to be ignored. By the time I climbed down off the curb, the rain had stopped trying to look like mercy and started doing its job washing the city's face, so you couldn't tell what scars were new. Lila Cruz folded the cigarette between two fingers as if the act itself gave her something to pin her nerves to. We'd been partners long enough for silence to be its own language. We spoke it like other people spoke weather. "You want to tell me why you dragged me out to a pile of wet concrete?" I asked. My voice came out like gravel. I was wearing my best bad decision coat and the same tie I'd bought the year I decided to believe my own promises. Lila watched the crime scene text like a hawk watches a field mouse, because someone left a card, and cards mean someone played a hand. She said her eyes didn't leave the body, and because it's not the first time. Not the first time. That's the phrase that makes you straighten up and check the locks twice. Her name on the coroner's sheet, if you could trust the scribble, was Nora Vance, 23, evening shift at Stowe and Will's Freight. Lila told me the name like it fit into a drawer she'd opened and found a set of keys. I felt the keys in my pocket and realized they were my good ones, the ones I kept for doors I hoped would stay shut. The brass token was light in my palm. It had a rough edge where someone had tried to shave off a number and failed. I traced the logo with my thumb, two intersecting lines, like an X with one bar longer than the other. Lila leaned over me and squinted. "It's not gang," she said. "I checked the precinct tags. This is older. Some old docs group used tokens like this New Eden, or..." She jabbed a finger at the emblem. "People who do favors, guard secrets. You don't bring a token unless you want someone to know you belonged." Belonged to what? I asked. To the deal. Layla's cigarette finally burned down. She flicked it into the gutter. "Or to the people who run the deals. The lead detective, a kid with more badges than sleep, told us to stay back. He didn't get to tell us what we already knew. We had the freedom to be nuisances because we paid for it with our own time and because we liked to be in the places others left. The kid wanted answers soon. The city wanted quiet sooner. We left the scene with the token pinched between my fingers and the photograph, half of a skyline on glossy paper, folded into my breast pocket like a secret I hadn't earned. Lila suggested we visit Stowe and Will's. I suggested we grab a coffee and pretend to be normal until our bones remembered otherwise. She declined coffee with a look like it would make her soft. Stowe and Will's was a warehouse that pretended to be architecture. It bore its function like a man bearing his sins, visible and heavy. The place smelled like rust and rope. A night manager with the hollow expression of someone in a job that chews souls for time checked our IDs and let us in because he'd seen the way Lila looked at paperwork, not like someone penciling through it, but like someone knitting a trap. Nora Vance had been there. She swept logged in cargo, moved pallets the size of small towns. She also had an after-hours job the manager seemed reluctant to mention until Lila showed him the brass token, and the manager's reluctance evaporated like it had been a lie all along. She worked odd runs, he said, contract pickups, door to door, guys with suitcases, paid cash, never asked where. His hands showed he had been in many fights. Think, Lila folded her arms. Who contracted those runs? He named a list that smelled of grease, Fox and Damon Logistics, a shell company that could rent names and vanish with a handshake. Lila's face tightened. Fox and Damon's been a ghost since they bought Harbor One. I finished. Harbor One, a construction outfit with permits the city looked at and smiled at. Developers with clean hands and rough friends. I'd seen Harbor One in the papers, blinking like an advertisement you didn't ask for. The manager handed over a roster. Nora's printed time card showed extra hours on 3 nights the month prior. They matched up with a set of tracking slips that had been scribbled on and then burned. Someone had tried to scrub a trail and left enough black to make a map. We drove to the address, scratched on the back of the token's photo, an old apartment block with windows like tired eyes. People down on their luck, and people who watched the street for a living lived there. Lila knocked. A woman named Denise opened the door and folded into a sadness that smelled like cheap perfume. Nora's roommate, she told us, had come home one night to find Nora packing a duffel and whispering on the phone and then gone. The landlord said he didn't want trouble. The city had a way of delegating trouble to private citizens with good poker faces. In Nora's room, under a lamp, I found the bag we all keep for hope. A half-finished CV, a lipstick smeared on a napkin, and a notebook with places written down, addresses, times, cell numbers scratched to look like they mattered. One page had a list, and the top line had been crossed out hard, as if the person who'd written it had no patience for mistakes. The page bore a name I recognized from court dockets and campaign posters. Gregory Vale. He'd run for development council last year, and then won the sort of election that needs people to look the other way. Lila looked at me like she'd seen a matching scar on a different man. People don't die from coincidence, she said. They die because someone wanted them quiet. We took a couple of photos. I stuffed the notebook into my jacket, and we left. Outside, at a diner that pretended to be open, Lila lit another cigarette and told me what she'd seen in Nora's social feed late. Night photos of construction sites and a name that didn't belong in the comments, Elias Knox. Elias Knox was a fixer you didn't look up unless you liked broken things. He'd been implicated in a graft trial that collapsed for reasons the city clerk's office described as insufficient evidence. Lila's mouth was a thin line. If Knox shows up here, she said, we'll know this is more than bad luck. You think this is him? I asked. I think he's good at making people useful and then unnecessary. She tapped the corner of her cigarette on the chrome sugar shaker. Nora could have been making payments she couldn't afford, or she saw something she shouldn't have. The token, she drew a slow breath, the smoke returning like a small memory, means someone wanted her to know who she was tied to. We drove back through Harrow with the city folded in around us, strip lights, shuttered storefronts, the silhouette of Harbor One rising like a promise with sharp corners. I thought about the brass token and the photograph, the way someone had left the skyline torn and imperfect. I thought about how secrets in a town like this weren't buried so much as fenced in. At the office, a light burned. Someone had been in our place while we were out. Paper scattered on the desk like snow after a fight. A Polaroid lay face down. I picked it up. On the back, someone had scrawled 2 words in black marker. Go deeper. Lila read it over my shoulder, and for the first time that night I saw an open wound where something had been confident. They don't send notes to people they aren't sure will look, she said. We wandered into something that wants to be quiet, and now someone's making sure we know they saw us. We didn't sleep that night. We sat across from each other in a room that smelled faintly of bleach and bad coffee and tried to fit the pieces together. The brass token was a key we did not have a lock for yet. The skyline photograph was only half a city. Nora Vance had been alive long enough to leave a list and pack a bag and then die under an overpass that the city calls infrastructure and the poor call a door. Somewhere outside, Harrow kept breathing. Somewhere else, someone was arranging pieces on a board like a chess player who enjoyed the flipping of pawns. We were two detectives in a city that preferred men in suits and stacks of clean paper. We had nothing but a half photo, a burn time card, and the stubbornness of people who had seen too much and decided to keep seeing. Lila put out her cigarette with the heel of her boot and looked at me. "You want to do this the polite way?" she asked. "No," I said. "I want to do it the way that makes them miss us when we're gone." She smiled without humor. "Then we start tomorrow. We talk to Fox and Damon. We find who else sent tokens. We look for Elias Knox, and we don't make the mistake of thinking the city will save us." Outside, the night hid its face. Inside, we turned the light on and began to make maps out of small, neat things that wanted to be ignored. The morning didn't bother showing up gentle. Harrow's sun rose the way a boxer gets off the mat. Staggered, irritated, and already bleeding light through industrial haze. I hadn't slept, and Lila looked like she'd argued with her thoughts all night and lost on points. The Polaroid with the message lay on the desk between us like a dare. Go deeper. Someone wanted us digging, but only far enough to see the fall. Lila broke the silence first. Fox and Damon's front office opens at 9. She checked her watch, but their ghost work starts earlier. She grabbed her coat. "You drive. I want both hands free in case someone feels conversational." I killed the light, and we stepped into a street that wore fog like a disguise. Harrow never really wakes, just changes masks. Fox and Damon Logistics had an address the utilities recognized, but the neighbors pretended not to. A brick building in the industrial strip near the river, wedged between an auto yard and a recycling plant that hadn't recycled anything but bodies of dead machines in 20 years. The sign on the main door was new. Too new, someone had money to pretend they were legitimate. Inside, a receptionist sat behind glass thick enough to stop memory. She didn't look up when we entered. She was too busy not caring. I flashed my badge. "We need to speak with whoever handles third. Party night contracts." She chewed her gum like it owed her interest. "We don't do night runs anymore." Layla leaned forward just enough to make the glass feel thinner. "Then you won't mind telling us who did. We're looking into a woman named Nora Vance." That made the receptionist pause, just a flicker, but in this business, flickers are confessions. She picked up a phone and muttered into the receiver. 30 silent seconds later, a man in a suit worth more than the building stepped out of a side door. He had the kind of smile that could sell clean water to a drowning man. "I'm Carl Damon," he said. "And unless a mess, Vance is suing us from beyond the grave. I can't imagine why 2 detectives are in my lobby." Layla didn't blink. She died with one of your tokens in her hand. He chuckled without humor. "We haven't used tokens in years. Cost cutting. Everything's digital now." "Then you won't mind explaining why yours had the emblem?" I said, flipping the token in my palm. Damon's eyes flicked to it. Sharp, involuntary, fast. "Recognition first, then calculation. We've got nothing to hide," he said, "but you'll need to speak to our legal advisor, Elias Knox." Lila and I exchanged a look. No surprise, just confirmation. The kind that puts weight in your coat. "Where do we find him?" I asked. "He finds you," Damon said, with a smile that had too many teeth. We left with nothing except proof that they were hiding everything. Back in the car, Lila stared out the window. "Knox in bed with Fox and Damon makes sense, but Gregory Vale, Harbor One, they're playing with bigger tools. And buying silence in bulk," I said. The skyline the dead girl held in her hand flickered in my mind. I pulled a torn photo from my coat and studied the smear of lights. Half a city, cut like a secret. Lila pointed at the edge. "That's Pierport District. Look." Those towers are Harbor One's new development zone. She tapped the blank half. Whatever Nora tore out was the part that mattered. We go there tonight. I said, we go there now. She corrected. Pierfort wasn't a district so much as a collection of ambition and ash. Old docks, condemned warehouses, cranes that looked like skeletons reaching for forgiveness. Harbor One's new construction site loomed behind temp fencing and warning signs no one read. A single guard sat in a booth with the enthusiasm of a man paid not to dream. We flashed our badges. He hesitated like he'd never seen real authority before. No workers on site today, he said. Inspection delay. Who ordered the delay? Lila asked. He shrugged. Council clearance. Gregory Vale's office. The name dropped into the silence like a body into water. What were they clearing? I asked. He nodded toward the far end of the site. Demolition started on the old substructure. Vaults under the pier. They said they were unstable. Vaults. Lila's eyes sharpened. Show us. I can't. She stepped closer. Try again. He cracked. They always do when the truth weighs more than their paycheck. We followed him past stacks of rebar and machines that looked abandoned mid-thought. Down a ramp under a temporary scaffold and into a hollowed space beneath the pier. It was dark, damp, and colder than the morning had any right to be. The guard clicked on a lamp. The concrete walls were etched with marks, scratches, numbers, symbols. Lila crouched near one wall. This wasn't storage, she said. It was holding. For what? I asked. She pointed at a metal door half, buried in rubble. Small, thick, sealed. Then we heard footsteps above. The guard went pale. No one scheduled. Lila signaled him to stay quiet. We moved back into the shadows as two men walked the platform overhead. Their voices filtered through the steel grate floor. Vale wants it cleared before the vote. One said, Knox says no more delays. And the girl asked the other, a pause, already handled, no connection left. Lila's jaw tightened. I memorized the voices like I memorize threats. The men moved on. We waited until the echoes died. The guard looked at us like we were ghosts. Lila stood. You didn't hear anything, she said. He nodded too quickly. Back at street level, the sky had turned the color of an old bruise. They killed her because she saw this place. Lila said, well, what's under it? And whatever's under it is tied to Knox, Vale, and Fox and Damon. I adjusted my coat. That's not coincidence. That's architecture. We need someone who hates them more than we do, she said. I know someone, I said, but he charges in favors and regrets. Her eyebrow lifted. Name, Father Mallory. She almost smiled. The priest, the confessor. I corrected, to criminals with guilty wallets. The wrong ally. Father Mallory's church wasn't the holy kind. It was a repurposed library on Gable Street with broken stained glass and pews that smelled like last chances. He was lighting candles when we entered, like he was trying to bribe the dark. My favorite sinners, he said without turning. What storm are you dragging in this time? We need a name, Lila said. Someone tied to Harbor One, Vale, Knox, and tokens like these. I placed the brass disc on the nearest pew. Mallory stared at it. The breath left him slow. You're digging in graveyard soil, he said, and the hands buried there aren't dead. Tell us, I said. He hesitated just long enough to suggest fear. They called themselves the Registry, he said. Old money, off-book trade, favors for land, Vale funds it, Knox cleans it, Fox and Damon move it. What do they move? Lila asked, his voice lowered. People, documents, sometimes both. A silence settled, heavy and knowing. Mallory leaned closer. If the girl found the vaults, she found more than concrete. And if they left you a warning, you've already stepped inside their circle. Layla folded her arms. We don't scare easy. Mallory looked at me. She might not, but you do. That's why you're still alive. Before we could answer, the church door creaked. A shadow crossed the entry glass. Mallory's eyes narrowed. Back room, he said quietly. We ducked through a side door just as footsteps entered the nave. Two men, same tone, same tread as the ones at the pier. We heard confessions open. One said mockingly, and we're feeling devout. Mallory's voice came slow and even. I only take truth here, and we're here to collect silence. Lila reached for her gun. I stayed still, listening. A click, a shove. Mallory grunted but didn't gasp. Then, the word we didn't want to hear, check the back. We moved fast out a side exit, through an alley that smelled like soaked cardboard and old fire escapes. Tires screeched at the front of the church, voices rising like smoke. We didn't stop moving. At the corner, Lila caught her breath. They're not warning us anymore, she said. They're hunting. Good, I said. Means they're scared. She looked at me the way you look at someone who might be lying to himself. Chapter 3's going to hurt, isn't it? Only if we survive long enough to write it. The city didn't bother hiding the blood in its teeth anymore. We split up at dawn. Not because we wanted to, but because staying together made us easier to follow. Lila took the notebook we found in Nora's room. I kept the brass token and the torn photo. We agreed on one rule: if either of us went silent, the other would burn the whole thing down. The streets were wet with a night the sun couldn't erase. I drove towards City Hall because that's where lies like to dress up as paperwork. Gregory Vale's office sat on the top floor behind security that treated access like a religion. The kind of place that assumes eternity until someone kicks the door in. I didn't get that far. A black sedan was parked across from my car before I reached the steps. The window rolled down just enough to show a face I'd only seen in case files and rumors spoken like curses. Elias Knox. He was clean in the way knives are clean. Polished for damage. Detective Hale. He said, like we were old friends who'd buried better men together. You've been asking questions in hallways that don't echo. Someone left a body under a bridge, I said. That tends to make noise. He gave a thin smile. She didn't understand the agreement. Curiosity has a cost. You do well to remember that. I leaned on the car. You kill her. Knox didn't blink. I don't kill. I correct trajectory. And the warning in my office, that wasn't a warning. He said that was courtesy. He looked past me to the skyline, the half I still had in my pocket. You've seen the vaults. You've heard the names. That makes you temporary. Tell your partner to step off, and we can pretend you're still useful. And if we don't, he didn't answer. He didn't need to. The sedan glided away like something that fed on distance. I called Lila. She didn't pick up. She met me 2 hours later at a diner that smelled like betrayal and reheated bacon. Her knuckles were pink, like she'd introduced them to someone's jaw. You're late, she said. You're bleeding. I said. She wiped her hand and didn't deny it. Mallory's alive. They roughed him up and left. He gave me something before we ran. She slid a folded paper across the table. An old map, Pierfort District before redevelopment. Lines showing tunnels and substructures not listed on any modern zoning record. One section circled in pencil, Vault 3 Registry intake. Below it, a name we both recognized, Gregory Vale. And there's more, she said. Look at the margin, in small handwriting, almost erased. Shipments July 14, Harbor 1 intake east shaft. I knew the date. Nora had logged extra hours that week. She saw something come in or go out. We hit the vault tonight, Lila said. They'll expect that. I replied, they expect us to scare, not to finish. We moved after dark. The guard from before wasn't there. In his place, a lock that looked recently changed. Lila picked it while I kept my hand on my gun and my thoughts on the people who'd be waiting to use the dark. The pier groaned under our steps. Old wood, old secrets. The entry to the vault tunnel was half-collapsed, but not enough to stop someone determined. The air below was cold and tasted like salt and iron. Flashlights cut thin paths through dust that hadn't been disturbed in decades, or last week. Vault 3 wasn't a vault, it was a chamber, and it wasn't empty. Stacks of crates, some split open, revealing binders, hard drives, film reels, documents sealed with government stamps older than both of us, photos of men shaking hands over land deals, lists of payments. Names of judges, cops, developers, men who traded silence for empire, and in the corner, bags, not freight bags, human-sized, 3 of them, Lila crouched and unzipped the nearest, bones not long dead. Wrapped in canvas, labeled with dates, the registry didn't move merchandise, they moved problems. I heard footsteps before I saw the light. Knox's voice rose behind us, smooth as wet stone. You could have walked away. He stood at the tunnel mouth with 2 men. Damon was one of them, tie loosened, eyes flat. The other held a silenced pistol like a handshake. Lila whispered, left side wall, weakest point. I didn't argue. Talking time was gone. Knox stepped closer. You think exposing this changes anything? We built the city's spine. You break it, it snaps on top of you. I kept him talking for 3 steps more, then Lila fired, not at Knox, at the ceiling brace above him. The crack shook the chamber. Stone and rusted beam dropped like judgment. Damon went down first. Silent, buried, Knox dove clear, but his gunman wasn't fast enough. Dust and noise swallowed everything. I pulled Lila back as the weak section gave way. The tunnel behind them collapsed, sealing the entrance. When the rumble stopped, we were alone with the dead and their secrets. We emerged from a side breach near the docks. Sirens were already cutting the air. Someone heard the collapse, or someone planned to. Layla handed me the notebook, the photo, the map. If one of us goes down, the other runs with it. You hear me? I nodded. A patrol car screeched to a stop in front of us. 2 uniforms jumped out, but not with guns drawn. Instead, one thrust a radio at me. Detective Hale, dispatch said you were under Pier Fort. They said to get you out before Code Black goes live. Code Black, I asked. The officer's face was too pale. Demolition order. Vale signed it last night. They're clearing the substructure tonight. Lila and I looked back toward the pier. The ground rumbled again, not from collapse. From charges, they were erasing the evidence, and us with it. We ran, not away, outward to the last service road with signal. Lila got Mallory on the line. I sent the files, photos, and names to every reporter, inspector, and council rival I'd ever hated. Then the pier lit up the sky. The blast was controlled, surgical. The registry didn't leave debris. They left message. All the endings that count 2 days later. The papers ran a story about unauthorized development demolition and a tragic structural failure. No mention of vaults. No names we sent made print yet, but calls were being made in hallways where whispers tremble. Gregory Vale announced a leave of absence for health reasons. Carl Damon's office was sealed pending audit. Elias Knox vanished. And Nora Vance, the official report said overdose. Ours will say murder. In our office, still smelling of ash and dust, Lila sat across from me with a cup of coffee that might once have been drinkable. You think any of it sticks? She asked. Not yet, I said, but it will. I looked at the torn skyline photo, the missing half still gone, but the part she left behind burned itself into memory. They built this city on buried things, I said. We just loosened the dirt. Lila smirked. You know they'll come for us. They already did. And Chapter 4, there is no Chapter 4, I said, just Fallout. She leaned back, lit a cigarette, and stared out the window at a skyline missing pieces. Good, she said. Fallout's where people like us live. Outside, Harrow swallowed the morning with the same hunger it had for years, but something under its teeth had fractured, and fractures don't stay quiet. Please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.